Thank you so much, Jay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for the live Q&A for Being Dead at the 29th Annual Woods Hole Film Festival. This year, the festival runs through midnight on Monday, August 3rd, and that's breaking news. We just announced it. My name is Sean Volk, and I'm an associate programmer at large for the festival. I'm moderating tonight's discussion from my apartment in Fargo, North Dakota. Before we begin, I would like to thank all of the festival supporters and sponsors. This festival is made possible by the assistance and the support of many people, and we hope that we will be able to count on you going forward as we continue to develop the virtual screening platform. A couple more housekeeping items. All films are eligible to receive both an audience and jury award. You can vote for the audience awards for the feature films in the screening platform. On the home image of each film, you'll see 5 stars next to the Watch Later box. That's where you vote. Remember, 1 star is the lowest rating, 5 stars is highest. For the short films, we'll send pass and ticket holders further information about how to vote. During today's Q&A, which will last about 40 minutes, I'll be speaking with John from Being Dead for a bit, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Q&As are a part of what make the festival experience so special, allowing audience members to connect directly with filmmakers. I'm really looking forward to your questions and the exciting directions in which they take our conversations. Remember to participate in the Q&A. Please write your questions in the Q&A section, which is on the panel at the bottom of the Zoom window. I'll pass your questions along to John for response. Please mute your audio, enjoy, and thank you so much for being with us today. I'm so excited to speak with the team from Being Dead. The film is a moving examination of love and grief, told through the story of 2 scientists confronting their traumatic past. This is a beautifully crafted film about the relationships that shape our lives and the inevitable transformation that is decay and decomposition. It's my pleasure to introduce you to John Meyers, the writer and director of Being Dead. Hi, John, how are you?
Hi, Sean. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much. John, where are you joining us from today?
Right now, I'm in Frederick, Maryland, which is about an hour west of D.C. and an hour west of Baltimore, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I'm calling you from Maryland.
All right, perfect. Well, again, I just really want to say thank you so much for joining us. I think Being Dead is such a beautiful film, and I'm really excited that we get a chance to discuss it and get a couple of questions from the audience. So just to kick things off, John, I wanted to ask you about Being Dead as a literary adaptation. So how did you initially discover the novel, and what made you decide this was a story that you wanted to tell for the big screen?
I was actually browsing through a small bookstore in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, back in August of 2001, and came across this novel, this evocative cover. It was called Being Dead, and it had a little note underneath. You know how sometimes the store owners of bookshops write those kind of notes when they're really taken with a novel, and it had one of those little handwritten scratches from him. And I generally know when I see one of them that I'm going to pretty much like the book. So picked it up, and you know, by the time I was halfway through it, I felt like I felt like I needed to try to adopt it into a screenplay somehow, some way, and it just had that quality about it. And the story hit me very deeply. So I originally found the novel. I read it in August of 2001 originally, and proceeded to write the author, and the rights were available, and they happened to be. It was a recently published work, relatively recently.
So was it difficult then to get the rights, or was it a pretty easy process?
Well, I was absolutely a nobody, and still am actually. But anyway, I wrote Jim Crace, the author, a 4-page note explaining how I would turn this work that had very little dialogue in the original novel, how I would turn it into something that was cinematic. And I had just had a kernel of an idea of how to do it, and he must have trusted me because they granted me the option for the book rights, and I went ahead and then adapted the novel into the screenplay.
Hmm.
And then as I was writing it, it was 9/11 actually occurred as I was literally writing the first draft of the script, and so that whole experience of living through that, as we all did, deeply affected me and affected the way that I viewed some of the larger themes in the story itself, that Jim so beautifully addresses in his book.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the process of adaptation, because I think one of the things that I admired so much about the film is that it really felt like a novel in its structure, because it was so fascinating to kind of watch things unfold in such a deliberate fashion, and then be able to kind of get these little glimpses and pieces and clues and put together how things are related and everything like that. How did you approach organizing such a rich and complex narrative, especially one that spans multiple generations and time periods?
Well, I hope I don't get in trouble for this. I never studied screenwriting or adaptation, I let Jim know in my original note that I needed to take considerable poetic license, and he said, please go for it, make it your story. So I had to change some things up. And honestly, Sean, that original draft, I'm sure I don't even have it anymore. I've probably done at least a dozen page one rewrites before we went into production in late 2018, over the years, as I continued with the project to try to bring it to screen. So it evolved considerably over the years as my life changed, as events changed, as I began to see the characters differently and appreciate subtler aspects. But I never did go back and read the book, you see. I only read the book once. I read the book once and was floored by it. And I never once have gone back and read the book, so I have no way to really even remember how my script parts ways with the book, although I know it does in several critical areas.
Okay. Well, that's really cool. So I'm wondering a little bit about the casting for the film. The ensemble is really so impressive. Could you talk a little bit about how you were able to connect with some of the actors and get them attached to the project?
I'm sorry. The question is how I met the actors.
Yeah. How did you come to meet them and encourage them to become involved with Being Dead?
Well, actually, I just posted something on Backstage.com in New York City, and we rented a little room to hold auditions for a couple days, and that's what we did. And first day, was, I windowed it down to a reasonable number, and then second day was callbacks, and so that entire ensemble, really, except for the recognizable names. When I say that, I mean, television stars, movie stars. The rest of the ensemble was all plucked from those 2 days of auditions in that old building in New York. Okay. And I feel most grateful. I just think the world of all of them, and they're just great backstories for each of the actors, in terms of how they came to be in that audition room at that juncture in time, and caught my eye. And So yeah, no, it was kind of a cool experience, and one I take away from the whole process, as one of the most rewarding things when you're actually, in a room that you've rented, and you have actors who would really like the role in the film coming in and giving you their best, and it's really a thrilling experience to hear your words for the first time really come back at you, and that's what that was for me, because I had never had a reading of it or anything like that. So it was a wonderful experience, and I'm so honored to have gotten to work with each and every one of them. They're tremendous actors. I think they have great futures, all of them.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear from your perspective as a director. What was it like working with, almost in a way, kind of like two sets of leads with two different actors portraying the same roles across time?
Yeah, it was a real challenge because, of course, when you're shooting a film in 15 short days with a crew of 5, you don't have much room for error. So you have to be pretty. You have to be perfect each day to make your day. And if you don't make your day, there's no slop time. So you're kind of cooked. There's just no wiggle room in a production like we had. So it was a challenge because oftentimes we would be going from I'd be going from working with Beth Marvel, to working with her daughter in the film, who plays Emilat Persson, who plays her daughter. And those two had never had a chance to meet. So it was there were all kinds of challenges. So I had to interpret each of their performances, for the other, because we didn't have we didn't have any kind of dailies or anything like that. So it was a challenge, and it was. I'm glad it worked out, because I think that I think the natural growth is pretty amazing. There was no way that I was going to be able to cast someone who absolutely positively looked like Beth Marvel looked at age 25. But I was able to cast somebody whose eyes and spirit, I imagine Beth Marvel's Celise would have exhibited, her character would have exhibited at that age. And so I think that's why it's believable. And that's just, I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of the casting bit, but just following my intuition, to be honest with you.
Okay. Were they, for the character of Celise, for example, were they able to kind of work together in any rehearsal time, or was it, just because of that tight timing that you kind of gave them the direction and then they just informed the character with their own performances?
Much closer to the latter, I would say, Sean. We didn't have any rehearsal time whatsoever. It was always, the first take was always our rehearsal, basically.
Okay.
And no, I mean, it's really, that was literally the way I had to see it, because I hadn't seen the scene read before by the actors. So yeah, no, it was, but then you'd only get another take or two at the most. So I had to fix it and within a take or two, or be done with it forever. And that puts some pressure on. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes everything feel kind of so urgent and in that moment. Yeah. So, could you talk a little bit about the complex emotions that really define a lot of the relationships in this family? Because I think when we think about the interactions between Celise and Sil, and then Joseph and Celise, so many of their interactions are really fraught with tension. I'd love to hear a little bit about how did you kind of navigate that emotional terrain as you were writing the characters and then working with those actors on set?
That's a wonderful question. Yeah, I had the ability, after I had cast Linus Roach and Beth Marvel as Joseph and Celeste, and then cast their younger versions out of New York, as I just described. I had a window of about 2 or 3 days to go back and tweak the script, and that was, I'm so glad I had that time, because it allowed me to, with their characters in mind and their faces in mind, take another pass at it. But I think in terms of navigating the emotional, waves that were going on, it was when you're working, I discovered when you work with seasoned professionals like Beth Marvel and Linus Roach and Catherine Irby, they come, they don't need to rehearse. They come with their A game, and they have thought about deeply about the character and the role, and perhaps have talked with each other about it, perhaps not. But they're excited to show me what they've come with, and it's usually just tremendous, and so I was taking most of the lead from Beth's persona, the coldness, the distance that she felt from Joseph, that we don't understand why. I mean, it just permeates the air in that first couple scenes between them, and in a way that I think any couple that has some years underneath their belt, can probably relate to at one time or another. And it can feel impenetrable and impossible to navigate. And so I think that when we meet Syl shortly thereafter, and slowly come to understand that this must be their offspring, their daughter, we begin to see in her, the result of growing up in a house where it was like walking on glass, and yet, also at the same time, could become very, violent in terms of the words and the language and the biting kind of tongues that would be used. And when you come from a household like that, you understand that it's every moment in that house is charged.
Well, I wanted to also just take a moment now to remind our panelists and our participants who are in the chat tonight and watching our Q&A. If you want to submit a question, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom panel of the Zoom call here. So you just click where it says Q&A, and you can type the question, and then we can take it, and I'll pass it along to John for you. So if you have a question that you're thinking about at home, please type it in, and I'll share it in the next little while. But John, I've definitely got a few more that I want to ask you as well. So, you brought up Catherine Irby just a couple minutes ago. I was so moved by the sequences in which she gives Salise's lecture. And we get to see her, the footage that they took while this experiment was being conducted, and we start to hear about the nature of decomposition. I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about how did you fuse this very emotional, very deeply felt narrative with the observations and methodical nature of science?
Well, again, it's a wonderful question, Sean. Thank you. In the novel, I hope I'm not giving anything away, but there is no professor, there is no lecture hall, there is nothing like that in the novel. What there was this beautiful narrative about decomposition that Jim Crace had woven, that in this miraculous 198-page work of literature, and I needed a way to bring that that description of the decomposition, which was hauntingly beautiful, somehow into the film. And so I created this character of someone filling in for a lecture that I imagined that Celise may have prepared to give her bio students each semester. So that's how that came about. But then in terms of shooting the lecture itself and incorporating that in, that was one of the most challenging bits of the post-production editing process when Ben and I were working together on the film is how, just cutting up that lecture, because unfortunately there was quite a bit of that we weren't able to include in the film for time purposes. So it was really, really tough decisions of what to keep and what we had to lose for timing's sake. But I will say that, I think that, I was, Katie Irby was the last actor to say yes for the film, and she said it just a few days before we actually began shooting. And, I'd always been a fan of hers from the TV series days, but I was not expecting, an actor of such depth and nuance to show up, and she just came so pleased to be there. And we filmed at this little community college in way south of Boston in Bridgewater, and it was just a wonderful day, and the students who were volunteering in the lecture hall that day as extras got to see a master class in acting and from Catherine, and it was wonderful for us all.
Well, she gives such a beautiful performance. And again, without giving anything away, I also really wanted to compliment the editing and how you approached especially the lecture scenes, now knowing that they weren't in the original novel, because I thought that they were so complex in the way that you could start to feel how you were merging this discussion of decay with this broader context of, well, what does this mean for this family we're seeing? What does this mean for these relationships? And I love,
and it was one of the arc that I think that Katie nailed so well, which is, what she and I discussed leading up to the shoot, was that slowly we have to understand and recognize in her eyes, as worried as she was to get the news that they had not showed up for 2 days.
Yep.
That she may well be talking about the fate of her two beloved friends. But she does it in such a subtle way that you hardly notice it. You have to actually see the movie a couple of times before you really see where that change comes. But there's a moment where it changes, and it's just one of those things that great actors are able to do with their eyes, and it was an education for us all.
Well, and I loved how you cut between those close-ups of her face with the scientific footage of the lecture. I thought those scenes were so powerful. I also wanted to ask you about the dialogue in the film that exists between science and poetry, because I think it's really cool how the two are kind of put in contrast with each other, but then how we also can see them working together. Could you talk a little bit about how you approach that?
Sure. I don't quote me on this, because again, I haven't read the book in 20 odd years, but I do remember that I believe that in the book, young Celise meets young Joseph as he's reading Yeats' poetry. And if that's not true, I'm sorry. Then it was inserted in one of the many drafts along the way and just became part of the deal. But I believe that was Jim Crace's brilliance in mixing those two seemingly disparate right left brain kind of things. And so here you had, you know, this very bookish, shy young man who we immediately recognize as someone dedicated to the research, but is also fascinated with Yeats. And it was going to, at least for me, Sean, it was going to take something that special in a potential lover and partner for the young Celeste to fall for him, especially over Testa. And because they were already well down that path, really, in the story, and so it needed to be that I think it's that combination of Yeats and how Yeats writing about the universal and about nature so affected, in young Joseph's own words, is his thinking and his view of the world, that hearing him think that out loud is one of the things that immediately attracted Celeste to him. And so in that way, I think it's pivotal to the story. I think, you know, if you remove that from the story, then his research alone is not that interesting. He's not even able to initially describe what it is.
Yeah.
But it is the element that she's fascinated, being British herself, and obviously understanding Yeats and how challenging Yeats is to study and to try to appreciate, that, you know, here you have this kind of nerdy scientist who is enthralled with Yeats. And I think that's just one of those magical moments when that you know, I think most people have when they meet a special other, that remains with folks.
So speaking of Yeats, the opening quotation in the film, "Every touch they give, death, prove that I lie," was that from the novel? Was that used there, or was that something that resonated with you, that you found from Yeats?
Yeah, it resonated with me. That's just something I found in Yeats. It's from one of his poems.
Well, very cool. No, I think it's such a thought-provoking way to open the film, and to put so clearly, very quickly, the idea that there is this kind of symmetry between love and decay, like we've been talking about. So I also wanted to ask you about the sound in the film, because it's so important, whether it's the score that's just really beautiful and haunting, or it's that cool, breathy sound of the insects that Joseph has discovered. How'd you go about creating the film's soundscape?
Well, all credit for that goes to Ben, and this is where I would surely turn the phone over to him. But no, he comes out of creating soundscapes. He was a Berklee College of music student, and then went on to teach cinematography there, and he specializes in composition, and so he composed a score, and really it was I did a lot of the background work I knew the sound I wanted to hear in terms of the spray hoppers, but only by sitting next to him and having him play with his dials and what have you, were we able to finally tune it in, and then from there he was able to do his magic and add his spatial effects. That, yeah, we're very proud of the sound. Thank you. I had the ability in a previous festival to actually see the film on a big multiplex, you know, stadium theater screen with, you know, gazillion speakers, and I must say it all the time we spent focused on the smallest aspects of the soundscape just comes through so well in the 5-1 mix and a good sound system. But I guess if the film is watched ever at home on home theaters, people might be able to appreciate that somehow.
Yeah. Well, I think that's such an interesting point too, especially with the surround sound that some home theater systems are, you know, beginning to employ, and some people are beginning to have at home. But I I think that'd be so beautiful to see this on the big screen, because the biggest screen that I was able to watch it on was my TV when I watched it the second time this week to kind of refresh for our discussion tonight. So I'm jealous of the audience that got to see it on the big screen.
Oh, there's so much phenomenal low end in the film. It's just, Ben's score is just so understated and tasteful, and the opposite of overpowering.
Yeah.
And as what I had asked for, and being a father-son combo, we have our kind of a shorthand communication of how to get from A to B, oftentimes. So it tends to work well. But and if one hasn't seen the movie yet, or if one wants to go back and watch it again, I encourage at least a pair of decent headphones, plugged into a computer will give you some of the low end and some of that sense of the openness that the film carries.
Mm-hmm. Well, I also wanted, and I think this maybe would be one to direct towards Ben too, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about the beautiful cinematography, especially in the scenes that you shot on the coast with, the sunset, the sunrise, and the water coming in. How was it, filming so much of the film outdoors?
It was quite challenging. I mean, this will, if anybody's out there listening, this is guerrilla filmmaking 101. But for instance, it was November, mid-November on the northern coast of Massachusetts. It's cold and windy there, and there was ice and snow and the whole nine yards. And one day it was we had to shoot out on the beach, and it was literally raining, freezing rain sideways, blowing 25 miles an hour constantly. Just you could hardly stand up. And we had Ben owned his own camera, his red camera, but we had rented. We had blown most of our production budget on renting a really good lens that we left on the camera the whole time. It's very expensive lens, like a $50,000 lens. And even though Ben had wrapped it in 2 plastic bags with rubber bands and Velcro, and his AC was charged with trying to keep it dry with umbrellas, by an hour into the shoot, it was gritty with sand and soaking wet, and with salt water, just from the rain and the moisture in the air. And we had 6 hours to go, and that evening we had it gets better. That evening we had a 2-hour break by the time we got off that beach, just frozen stiff, before we had to show up at the bar to shoot the bar scene. And the bar we had for one night, and that was a really difficult scene to set up. And because Ben's camera and lens got so wet that afternoon on the beach, it kept on shutting down about every 30 or 40 seconds for the first couple hours of the evening.
Oh my gosh.
So we thought we were going to lose that entire scene, really, because there was no backup camera of any kind. And so it's, the weather was a factor. There's no question about it. We had our share of some pleasant days, but we had some really cold nights and really cold mornings, and some serious nor'easter weather to contend with.
Sure. Well, I also wanted to ask you about kind of the dynamic in the film. And again, not getting too specifically into spoilers in case some of our participants tonight haven't seen the film yet. But I think it's so interesting how much of a role this sense of loss and kind of betrayal will play, and how that can kind of shape your life moving forward. But I was wondering if you could talk about kind of diametrically opposed to that, the kind of budding relationship and connection that we're starting to see between Sil and Geo, and that
Mhm.
kind of those very sweet moments of humanity where there seems to be almost a very kind of genuine sense of companionship there, and this sense of warmth between the characters. Could you talk a little bit about their dynamic?
Sure. It's a wonderful question. Thanks. I mean that. Because most people don't go there, and I'll try to be circumvent to not give away too much. But it's for me, as a filmmaker, I guess it always comes down to just a few very precious moments, I think, that decide when the soul decides that one has met one's life partner. And I don't know, I have no evidence to back that up. It's just been my experience, and maybe I've seen too many movies where it happens too. I don't know, but I think it's more often than not true to life. And I just felt like the conversation that I wanted to give Sil and Geo, it was over birds. It was over something actually quite scientific, and that is feeding birds and the proper way to feed birds. And unbeknownst to him, Geo was looking at it from such a beautifully practical and logical standpoint.
Yeah.
That you have to invite them in. And even aside from the relief that she feels that he's still there the next morning, that he hasn't left, and just the sense that she's getting from him that this is the first man in her life that she's ever met, who is comfortable in his own skin.
Yeah.
And it's that's all I want. That's all I needed and wanted Geo to be, is comfortable in his own skin, and sure and proud of what he does and what he knows and what he doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think that comes across in Nick's portrayal of him. Again, without rehearsal time, that was just lovely to watch Emma Lott, who plays Sil, and Nick, perform that scene, where they connect in that way before the phone rings. It tells someone who's watching all they really need to know, I think, about the potential for their level of communication.
Absolutely. Well, as we're wrapping up here, John, I wanted to ask you, for people that are listening in on our conversation today, if they want to help support the film, where can they go to find out more about it, about possible screenings and other things? Are there social media accounts they should follow, or a website they should visit, or a newsletter?
Well, thank you for asking that, whoever asked it. We are, I guess the easiest thing to do is Ben is our IT guy. He wears a zillion hats in this operation, but he's running the Instagram and the social media stuff, and that stuff is connected to by our website. And if you want me to give that, I can give that now.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, it's www.beingdeadthemovie.com. So pretty easy.
Yeah. Well, John, thank you.
And there's a link there to social media. But we in terms of seeing the film, we have just signed a distribution deal, which we're very, very pleased about. And I believe they're looking to release the movie early next year, so as not to have to, for this little micro budget film, to have to fight against the studio picks this fall and all that stuff.
Congratulations.
So I guess there'll be announcements on our social media, leading up to that whole thing. And I still, I still have dreams that it'll be safe enough to four-wall a theater at some point and show the movie to people in a proper theater setting. but
Mhm.
that's not up to me. That's up to this awful virus. I know, and then there are bigger fish to fry. But short of that, I think it'll. The short answer is it looks like it'll be early next year when it becomes available on one of those streaming services or whatever. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, congratulations. That's such exciting news. And very cool for us at Woods Hole that we get to see it before it breaks out on other platforms and with other audiences. So thank you, John. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for having this conversation tonight. It's been a lot of fun
Well,
to get to
I
discuss the.
appreciate. Yeah, and thank really it was I'm just blown away by your questions, Sean. I mean, you
Thank you.
watched and thought about the film, and I appreciate that very much. They were really, really, very thought provoking and insightful questions, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it too. I love the film, and I'm glad that we're able to play it at Woods Hole and that audiences were able to join us tonight. So please, everybody, remember, if you'd like to vote for Being Dead for the Audience Award, just go back to the film's landing page, and you can vote for the film right next to the Watch Next button. There are 5 stars there, with 5 stars being the best. Remember, the Woods Hole Film Festival continues through Monday, August 3rd. It's just been extended. So it's kind of like back by popular demand already without ever having gone. But John, thank you once again for joining us, and thank you all for watching. And thank you everyone for Woods Hole. We'll see you at other Q&As. And John, thanks so much for sharing the
Very
film.
much. Hey, thanks everybody for tuning in, and everybody be safe.
Yes, enjoy the
Bye-bye.
rest of the festival, everyone. Thank you.